what the Church of Scientology is so afraid of.
This is SPTV.
Welcome back, everybody, for more SPTV coverage of the Danny Masterson criminal trial live in Los Angeles. This morning was really interesting. The defense case began to fall apart this morning. And I know if you've been watching a lot of my coverage, you might be like, well, it sounds like it's been falling apart the entire time. Well, I feel like the defense has been failing to score points that they've been trying to score. But in the opening statements, it was pretty clear that they did actually have a particular strategy in the defense, which was to use the testimony of the police officers against the Jane Does, particularly Detective Reyes, who we've heard so much about. She's been known as Reyes throughout the testimony of all the Jane Does, and yet I believe due to a marriage, she actually now has to go by Detective Miape. So it's been a little confusing for the jurors, but I think not too confusing. And in the opening statements, Philip Cohen said to the jury, you are going to hear that the detectives told the Jane Does not to talk to each other. They ignored that advice. Not to talk to potential witnesses. They ignored that advice. That the Jane Does were warned that if they spoke to each other, it would be fatal to the case. They would contaminate the evidence, the testimony. Cross-pollination is a word that was thrown around, but that it would, fatal is the word Cohen was really hanging on. Fatal, like it would destroy the case. Fatal was the word he was hanging on, but it wasn't the only word that he used. And yet, in his in the direct examination of Detective Reyes, I'm going to refer to her as Detective Reyes, she very specifically testified to the fact that any warnings that she gave the Jane Does on this subject were just standard garden variety boilerplate warnings she would give any victims in any case. And it was not in response to anything they specifically were doing. And she testified that said, not only that, but even further, when it was actually Jane Doe 2 who came up with those words when she was being given the standard warning. In other words, the warning was such, don't speak to any other victims or it would be destructive to the case. And Jane Doe 2 said something of, I understand that if we were to do such and such and so, it could be fatal to the case. There could be cross-pollination. It was Jane Doe 2's words that, that Cohen was quoting from, perhaps seemingly not knowing it was Jane Doe 2's words. In other words, they took some of the air out of the weight of this admonishment when it was revealed that it wasn't even the words of the detective. Even further still, Detective Reyes testified to the fact that she actually told the Jane Does that in response, like Detective Reyes, in response to being informed about the type of communication that had been occurring between the Jane Does, Detective Reyes even told them that she did not think they were putting the case at risk. She did not think that they were contaminating each other's testimony or creating cross-pollination or whatever. And that's how she started her testimony. This made Philip Cohen very, very mad. And Cohen spent I don't know what has felt like at least 2 hours of cross-examination, essentially trying to create the impression in the jury that Detective Reyes is such an incompetent detective and has done such a poor job following up on inconsistencies in the case that she's not even qualified to have the opinion that the Jane Does have not contaminated the case or cross-pollinated each other's testimony. It was a remarkable thing to observe. And that's why I say the defense strategy began to fall apart, because this was really the first item. This was really the first piece of strategy the defense had, other than just trying to impeach the credibility of the witnesses in general and the victims in general. And they get, details here that weren't mentioned here. And you probably weren't drugged because you were just so drunk and all that kind of stuff. This was really what we were led to believe was going to be the big gotcha, that the investigating detectives themselves felt that the Jane Does were creating fatal problems in this case. And the detective testified to the exact opposite. How could this have occurred? Let me pull up my notes real quick, and there were some other things I wanted to highlight. We got out of court 15 minutes early, and we're going back to court 15 minutes early. So I got to keep a little bit of an eye on the clock here. First of all, guys, in Danny Masterson's section of the courtroom this morning, there were only 4 people there in his section this morning. One other person came in later. We had Owen Elliott, who this entire time I have not known who this woman is, but she's been identified as Owen Elliott. She's the daughter of one of the people in the Mamas and the Papas band. Not clear if she's actually related to Bijou Phillips or not. It's not clear to me, at least. Jordan Masterson was there. Alana Masterson was there. Chris Wadhams were there. Carol Masterson came in late. And there's one other girl over there. I just do not know who she is. Okay, let's see. The first highlighted section that I had here. Okay, so you interviewed with Jane Doe 2. Yes, where? At her home. When? January 2017. Were you alone? No, Detective Villegas was with me. How long did the interview last? About 2 to 3 hours. How did Jane Doe 2 appear to you during the interview? I really like this. She said, worried, calm, anxious about talking to us, telling us what happened to her, maybe a bit distrustful of us. Detective Reyes, right from the beginning, was testifying that the Jane Does were distrustful of the police. And she went into some detail, not only because they were worried that the LAPD could be in Scientology's pocket. Also, they were distrustful of the police in general from having been Scientologists, and Scientology had already tried to prevent them from going to the police. Detective Reyes testified to that right out of the gate over many overruled objections from the defense. I thought that was pretty remarkable that she got it started on that note. Because she knew as a former Scientologist, she was worried that Scientology would do something bad to her, worried in general, because she knows what Scientology can do. This is what Detective Reyes said right out of the gate. Next highlighted section. Let's see. She was very upset. She had already in a state. Oh, sorry. I have some typos here. She was very upset. She was already in a state. About what the church could find out about her. She was nervous about what the church could find out about her, or they could harm her, or that maybe somehow the cops in the church had a relationship. She was just very unhinged about the whole situation, and rightly so, was the testimony of Detective Reyes. Okay, the question is, to your knowledge, what about Jane Doe 3? Did she learn about this? Did she have the same number? Oh, yeah, because this is what was being discussed here. The line of questioning here is, and this testimony was had to do with the subject of things that had occurred in the process of this investigation that served to reinforce the Jane Doe's skepticism and distrust of the police. And one of the things that occurred is the police gave the Jane Doe's special phone numbers to use to record what they call pretext conversations. So this is a way to gather evidence where the police says, okay, there are some witnesses in this case who are Scientologists. We're going to give you a phone number to use to call these people and secretly record conversations with them, basically to get them on the record saying things that they probably wouldn't say on the stand because they're Scientologists and they will lie. And so what happened is Jane Doe 1, after using this phone number for a couple weeks, Googled the phone number just to see what would come up. And when she put that phone number into Google, she got a whole bunch of search results warning people that this was a phone number that the police would use to set people up, and don't cooperate if you get a phone call from this number. And Jane Doe 1 is like, how in the hell is the police giving us a phone number that's known to be a number used by the police? And Detective Reyes was asked about her thoughts on all this. Detective Reyes acknowledged that this occurred, that she had never in her entire career seen something like this occur. She had never seen one of these phone numbers leak like that. She had never seen any of the other phone numbers used in such situations have any search results. Detective Reyes was implying, in other words, if I was on the jury, what I would infer is that Detective Reyes was saying this leak, this accident, this whatever you want to call this, could very likely have been something that was done by someone at the LAPD who was working on behalf of Scientology. She did not directly say that. It is 100% what I would infer if I was on the jury, because she went on to say it's never happened before. She said, I even followed up with our tech people to ask them how such a thing could occur. And they said, these are randomly generated phone numbers. There's no way something like this could occur. These aren't things that get reused. The implication being that someone in the LAPD would have had to leak that these were the numbers being used by these women in this case. And no other explanation seemed plausible, at least to Detective Reyes. Really remarkable shit. Okay, so let's see. She then went on to say, is it fair to say that there was already an initial distrust of law enforcement? Yes, that is fair, because from the beginning, the church told them not to told them not to report to us, meaning the LAPD. Would you say that after learning about the dedicated numbers being out there, would you say that they had a greater distrust from what you were able to observe? Yes, and that has never happened at any time during my career. And you've set up a number of, she explained that using these pretext phone calls, these numbers for pretext calls, totally common, happens all the time. There's nothing unusual about it. She's done it tons and tons of times, and a leak like this has never occurred before. Pretty remarkable stuff. Okay, let's see. Well, I highlighted this section, so let's just read it. At some point in time, did you have a conversation with any of the victims with regards to communication between themselves in the case? She said, yes, all three. Did you at some point advise them that they should not be talking to one another in the case? Yes, I did. Was there any reaction from any of the Jane Does to being told that? Jane Doe 2 said that she's going to talk to whoever she wants to talk to. But did you tell them to talk? But did you tell them to talk to certain witnesses as part of the pretext calls? And she says, yes. This was interesting because it's one thing, for the defense to make a big deal about the fact that the Jane Does were told not to talk to anyone. And you go, well, except for the people they were specifically told to talk to as a part of the pretext calls. So how can you make a big deal of fact that they were told not to talk to anybody when they were actually specifically told to talk to as many people as possible and record the conversations? So that was interesting to hear the detective testify to that. When you told Jane Doe 2 she should not be talking to other victims about the case, she told you that she understood and that doing so may cause cross-contamination in the case. Okay, so this was the part of the testimony where we learned it was actually Jane Doe 2's words herself, her own words, that Cohen was seizing upon, misrepresenting those words as having come from the detective. Okay, so that's what that was. Okay, I'm going to fast forward because we are going to be a little short on time here. Okay, so there was a point. I've got this highlighted, so we're just going to read it. I'm not quite sure what we're about to read, but we're going to read it. So the judge dismissed the jury, and she says to Cohen, please don't ask the question for which you want to ask the follow-up. I know that the deputy DAs have struggled with this as well, and I've admonished them not to do it. Just ask the question. Don't restate the previous testimony. Cohen says the tape has largely been played. I want to ask about specific statements that have been played in the tape. The tape was a video. I want to show the transcript of the tape and ask specific questions about what the transcript says. The judge says, okay, a couple things. The police cannot testify if they think testimony is truthful or not. They can only testify as to what the testimony was. Cohen says, I objected when the detective was asked for her opinion as to whether or not there was contamination. I think that question called for an improper opinion because the question seems to ask if she finds the witnesses credible. Okay, this is why I highlighted this. Because Cohen's making a big deal about the fact that Detective Reyes saying that she did not think the Jane Does have created any contamination in the testimony or the evidence or the case was tantamount to her testifying that she found the witnesses credible. And Cohen knows that she's not allowed to testify to that. So he's trying to skirt the rules a little bit to sort of get her to say the opposite. As Cohen was saying all of this, in my mind, I'm thinking, all she said was that they didn't create contamination. That doesn't necessarily mean she found them credible. And this is what I was thinking as he was saying with this. Remember, guys, I'm no jurist. I'm no, distinguished member of the bar. I'm just a guy who grew up in a cult. But this is what I'm thinking as he's saying all this. The judge then enters in and goes, credibility is not the same thing as contamination. So, hey, sometimes a guy who's just a layman and doesn't really know much can still follow along closely enough and have the same opinions and conclusions as a seasoned hotshot judge. And I think it goes to, I think I highlighted this partially because it also, I think, speaks to the fact that Cohen is kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel on some of these arguments and some of these objections and making a really big deal about things that even as someone like me, he's conflating things that no one has any business conflating. Contamination and credibility aren't even similar, to be perfectly honest. And that was something that occurred because really Cohen made a big deal about this. Okay, so let's fast forward a little bit here to the next thing that I highlighted. Okay, here's the next section that I highlighted. I don't know why I highlighted it, but we'll find out together. Have you reviewed Jane Doe 1's transcript in advance of her testimony? Reyes says yes. Have you reviewed Meyer's interview with Jane Doe 1? Yes. Did Jane Doe 1 ever mention to you that after the September 2002 incident with Danny? Yeah, I don't want to read this part. Okay, I think I highlighted this part because the entire focus of Cohen's cross-examination of Detective Myers was trying to highlight interviews she had not read the entire transcript of, or perceived inconsistencies in any of the Jane Doe's testimonies that Cohen felt were inconsistencies that Detective Myers had never followed up on. You know, like it's almost like Cohen's trying to paint this picture where Detective Myers never bothered to follow up on inconsistencies. The problem is that Cohen has a way of claiming something is an inconsistency that no one else in their right mind would claim is an inconsistency. Something that you said in interview number 3 that you hadn't said in interview number 1. Something that you mentioned in interview number 5 that you didn't mention in interview number 3. There's been a lot of expert testimony in this case on this subject of why new details would emerge over time that may not have been divulged in the very first interview. Anyway, I felt Cohen's cross-examination was in large part a waste of time, but what else is he going to do? You know, he can only work with what he's got. Okay, so let's see. I highlighted this next portion. It's honestly just more of the same. Oh yeah, and this is one of the, I'm going to highlight this just as an example of what the hell's going on over there in the defense, in the defensive strategy. In Detective Reyes' testimony, there was mention of a non-disclosure agreement that Jane Doe 1 signed, was kind of made, forced, tricked into signing sort of with Danny Masterson. It was a meeting that occurred with in Thomas Mesereau's office, and she wasn't given a copy of this thing. Anyway, there's been a lot of testimony on this subject. Cohen decided he was going to make a very big deal of the fact that this document keeps being referred to as an NDA, but is in fact not an NDA. But here's the back and forth that occurred in court. This is from Cohen to Detective Myers. You mentioned an NDA. Yes. NDA means what? Non-disclosure agreement. Was there an NDA? Yes. Have you seen it? I don't recall. Would it refresh your memory if I showed you the document? Yes. Did Jane Doe 1 say this was an NDA? Yes. And then she shows her the document. What is the document titled? And she goes, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't look at the title of it. Would it help to refresh if I showed you again? Yes. What is the document titled? Confidential Settlement and Non-Disclosure Agreement. To any normal person, that still sounds like it's an NDA. Cohen thinks it's a huge deal that it's not an NDA. It's a confidential settlement with a non-disclosure agreement clause. And you're like, who do you think cares about that distinction? I can't figure out why I should care about the distinction. I have to imagine the jurors also don't care. The detective clearly doesn't care about the distinction. Cohen seems to think this is a big deal. Did Jane Doe 1 tell you that she received money as a result of the settlement? Yes. Was it $400,000? Yes. No further questions. That was on not just cross, that was on recross. Cohen spent all those questions on recross to make a point that no one has any idea what point he thinks he made. I'm just using this as an example, guys, of, you know, a lot of the viewers have said, what is it? When you have a good argument, you pound on the argument. When you rely on the law, you pound on the law. When you have nothing to rely on, you pound on the table. And Cohen's doing a lot of pounding on the table. Let's see. What else did I highlight here? Okay, here's something else I highlighted. Let's find out why. Did they say, yeah. So Reyes, there was a point when the Jane Does requested a copy from Detective Reyes of the full police report that had been made as a result of their interviews. And she said that for each of them who made the request, instead of sending them a full copy of the report, she just sent them the cover page of the report, and that the Jane Does were pretty pissed off about this. And this is here's some questions that were asked about this. This is redirect. So this is being asked by the DA Mueller, Deputy DA Mueller. Did the Jane Does say why they were upset? Yes, they wanted the full report. Did they say why they wanted the full report? I think it was to review everything that was written about their statements. Did they say that they had concerns about what might have been in the reports? Yes. They wanted to know if I had written anything in the report that was different than what they had actually said. They did not trust the police. And they thought that maybe what I wrote in the report was not an accurate reflection of what they had said in their interviews. So they wanted to make sure that the reports were accurate. And then there was an objection because I think it was restating the testimony. So I really found it remarkable and refreshing and surprising that Detective Reyes was so willing to testify that the Jane Does all had a state of mind, even from the very beginning, of not trusting the police. And there was testimony that I haven't highlighted here, and that this was most likely one of the factors as to why they would not have necessarily told everything there was to tell right in the beginning interview. In fact, she even gave some other specifics. I think I did highlight this later on. No, it looks like I didn't. Where, oh, here it is. Would you expect, well, here we go. I'll just read this. Do you expect that the victims of sexual assault will initially give you every single detail of everything that happened in the first interview? Objection that was sustained. In your experience, have you found it to be the case that victims of sexual assault will provide every detail? There was an objection sustained. Would you expect to see the same details in each interview? And Detective Vargas said, no, details can change. They might remember things differently. They may not have told everything to begin with for fear of being judged. They might have been nervous. And then there was, could it also be from different interviewers simply asking different questions? And the answer was yes. There was a part of the testimony where it was also implied that their fear and distrust of the police could also have factored into why some details might have changed. Now, guys, remember, the details that have changed, or that Cohen claims have changed, are not details that are intensely relevant to the sexual assault itself. It's just minor details that you would expect to change. Also, some of the details that Cohen claims have changed haven't really changed. It's just that in earlier interviews, the Jane Does, when asked about things about which they didn't have clear memories, sometimes speculated that it might have been this, or it could have been this, or it could have been this. And many times they're speculating about things they don't even particularly care about or think are important. They're just giving speculations that it could have, it could have varied from this to this. And then Cohen will seize on one of the things they said and act like they've changed their testimony. Anyway, based on the opening statements, I expected Reyes' testimony to be very negative and derogatory of the Jane Does. And what we got was the exact opposite. And you could tell Cohen was pissed, and he was determined to make Detective Reyes sound like an incompetent, biased detective. He even started his initial cross by saying, are you here hoping for a particular outcome in this case? Are you here to testify neutrally? I was like, whoa, I thought this detective was here to help you. And now you're attacking her for being biased. And that's why the title of this update is Defense Falls Apart. And that's pretty much all I've got for you. Guys, there was some off-the-record chit-chat this morning between the attorneys and the judge. It was off the record, but it didn't sound like they were specifically didn't want anyone to hear. It just happened to be off the record. It does still seem like the prosecution is planning on resting its case by the end of day tomorrow. And that is very exciting. That is very exciting. It means the rest of the testimony that we are going to hear should be pretty quick. All right, let's see, guys. That's my update. Holy shit, that was already 25 minutes. What time is it? Okay, I got to wrap it up. Let me go through the comments here real quick. You know how much I hate dead air. Okay, Paula Puffer. She is the daughter of Cass Elliot. Okay, there you go. Given the family tree of the Phillips, like, does being the daughter of Cass Elliot make her related to Bijou Phillips? I'm curious to know. Mark Headley's in the chat. Hey, party people. Hey. Hey, Mark. Thanks for joining. The king of the cracker lickers himself. All right, scrolling down, looking for more. Johnny K, first time catching you live from Toronto. Thanks for being awesome. Well, thanks for joining us live, and thank you for the super chat, Johnny. I really appreciate it. Kalila McDonald giving her regular praise to the world's #1 moderator, Goldie. Goldie is the best ever. Just needed to say that. Yes, she is. Does a fantastic job. Thank you, as always, Goldie. Fat Cats Heaven, set up for Danny Masterson retrial for incompetent counsel. I very seriously doubt that incompetent counsel will be one of the grounds for appeal. I think you mean appeal. Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I don't know. It's funny. I know I sort of paint, I kind of tend to paint Cohen as being incompetent. I don't actually think he's incompetent. I kind of think he's doing the best he can do with what he has. I like to tease him, make fun of him, but I don't actually think he's incompetent. Okay, Celine Blacko. Thanks, Aaron. Would love to see a video on Bijou. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to talk about on Bijou, other than her dressing up in full body blackface at a Halloween party, which is a very funny photograph that I have. And you might go, whoa, was she just maybe dressing up as a famous person, Diana Ross? No, she just went to a party as a black woman. Other than that, I honestly don't have much to talk about regarding Bijou, but we'll see. Okay, Denver Stevo. At what point is Danny going to stand up and say, Your Honor, I humbly would like to fire these fools defending me? Or am I just watching too much Law and Order? Hi, Osa, you smell like poo. Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know how to explain why Detective Reyes's testimony was characterized in opening statements as being so drastically different as what we saw. Did Cohen really not know how she was going to testify? And I also have to scratch my head a little bit because Detective Reyes has already testified in the first trial. And I hesitate to even say anything about this because I don't have a distinct memory of it. But I do not recall Detective Reyes's testimony being quite like this in the first trial. I'm going to have to go back and read the transcript and read the notes. Because did she change her testimony? Like, I truly don't know what's going on. I have to take the time to go back and see how she testified previously. Because how in the world did they mischaracterize her testimony in the opening statements? Anyway, I can't dwell on it too long because I just don't have a distinct memory of it. So, all right, guys, that's what I got for you. I'm hoping that we're going to hear more. Because remember, guys, if the people's going to rest their case today or tomorrow, then that means we're going to run right into the evidentiary hearing that the judge is scheduling into how the redacted discovery file that was turned over to the defense attorneys wound up in the hand of David Miscavige's agent, attorney Vicky Podboreski. And we are going to get that evidentiary hearing. And I hope it doesn't last too long because I don't want it to postpone the closing arguments that we're hoping to hear on Monday. But just as exciting as the closing arguments is an evidentiary hearing about how this evidence wound up in Scientology's hands. I'm here for it. I just don't want it to take a long time. So, I don't want to overstate it, but what I heard this morning made me go, are they planning on resting their case today? And I was like, don't say that publicly because maybe you misunderstood something. I thought I heard something that made me go, are they resting their case today? But let's just put that to the side. Let's pretend like I didn't hear that. And let's pretend like they're planning on resting their case tomorrow. Either way, we're going to get to this evidentiary hearing pretty quickly. And I'm super excited for that. Okay, guys. So that's what I got. Next update, unless we get out of court early or something, will be at 4:30 Pacific, 7:30 Eastern. Stay tuned for that. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Thanks, everyone who watches until the very end. And I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, Oh, Daddy, Mama, Love, then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not, subscribe